Thal Marwick never fancied himself a hero. Heroes got their faces on posters and their bodies in coffins. Thal preferred his face intact and his body alive. Thank you very much. But here he was, on another dreary shift in Selene's Bastion, the lunar colony that was less a beacon of hope and more a testament to human stubbornness. The kind of place where dreams went to die, and they didn't even get a nice funeral. "Thal, you got a minute?" came the voice of Carla, his partner in crime, or rather in crime prevention. She had the sort of voice that could grate cheese. "For you, Carla, always," Thal replied, leaning back in his chair, the cheap metal groaning like an old man getting up from a nap. "What's up?" "There's a situation down in processing. Some guy's going nuts. Claims he can see the future or something." "Ah, the classic Tuesday afternoon drama," Thal said, pulling himself to his feet. "Did he mention winning lottery numbers or just the usual apocalypse nonsense?" Carla smirked. "If it was lottery numbers, I'd have taken over for him." Thal grabbed his gear, a flashlight that barely worked, a stun baton that worked too well, and a badge that didn't work at all. "Let's go see this Nostradamus wannabe." They made their way through the corridors of Selene's Bastion, where the lighting was always dim enough that you had to squint, but bright enough to see the rat-sized dust bunnies. The colony was a marvel of modern engineering if you consider duct tape a construction material. Processing was a bit of a misnomer. It was more of a chaotic warehouse where new arrivals and supplies were dumped like unwanted junk. And right there in the middle of it was their prophet, a wiry man with hair that looked like it had been styled by electricity. "I'm telling you, I can see it," he shouted, eyes wide with a fervor usually reserved for infomercial hosts selling miracle cleaners. "See what exactly?" Thal asked, his tone walking the fine line between skepticism and boredom. "The end, man, the end of everything. They're coming." "Who?" "The tax collectors," Thal shot back, his grin a razor blade. "Aliens, parasites, they're already here," the man insisted, looking around as if expecting to see little green men lurking in the shadows. Carla rolled her eyes hard enough to give herself a headache. "Right. What's your name, buddy?" "Jeremiah," he replied, with the air of someone delivering a profound truth. "Listen, Jeremiah," Thal said, adopting his best patronizing tone. "What makes you think aliens give a crap about our little rock?" "I mean, if I were an alien, I'd be on a beach planet sipping whatever exotic cocktails aliens drink, not hanging out in this glorified tool shed." Jeremiah's hands trembled and his eyes darted around the room. "It's too late. They're inside us, changing us. You have to believe me." Thal sighed. "Look, I don't know what you're on, but maybe you should lay off it for a bit, yeah." But before he could further indulge his career as a sarcastic skeptic, Jeremiah's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed like a poorly built sandcastle. "Oh crap," Carla muttered, rushing forward. "Help me out here, Thal." They lowered Jeremiah to the ground, his body twitching like a fish out of water. Thal felt for a pulse, finding it erratic and weak. "Call medical," Thal said, his tone suddenly more serious. "And make it quick." As Carla radioed for assistance, Thal couldn't shake the weird feeling crawling up his spine. He'd seen his fair share of lunatics, but there was something about Jeremiah that felt off. Not that he believed in alien parasites. That was the stuff of late-night horror flicks, right? But still, he couldn't help but wonder just what the hell was going on. By the time the medics arrived, Jeremiah was unconscious, leaving Thal and Carla with more questions than answers. They watched as he was carted off, the whispers about alien parasites already spreading through the colony like a flu virus. "You think there's anything to it?" Carla asked as they trudged back to their office. Thal shrugged. "Probably not. But if there is, at least it'll break up the monotony." They returned to their tiny corner of the colony, where the air was just as stale and the view just as bleak. Thal collapsed into his chair, which squeaked in protest. "Let the higher-ups deal with it," Carla said, dropping into her seat. "They get paid the big bucks to ignore problems until they explode." Thal chuckled. "True. But this is Selene's Bastion, where explosions are a daily occurrence." As they waded through the paperwork, Thal couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. But he put it aside, focusing instead on the mundane, the ordinary, the safe. Hours later, just as Thal contemplated the merits of a nap, the comm buzzed. It was the colony's chief administrator, Eldrin Morrow, a man whose talent for avoiding responsibility was only rivaled by his talent for growing an impressively greasy mustache. "Marwick, you there?" Morrow's voice crackled through the speaker, dripping with the kind of authority that only truly useless people possessed. "Always a pleasure, Chief," Thal replied with a grin. "What can I do for you?" "We've got a problem," Morrow said, his tone suggesting he didn't really care but was obligated to pretend. "This business with what is it now, alien parasites?" "Yeah, heard about that. Real blockbuster stuff," Thal said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Right. Well, the board's concerned. Not about the aliens, mind you, but about the productivity drop." "Ah, yes, productivity. The real tragedy," Thal deadpanned. "Just keep an eye on it, will you? We can't have rumors affecting our output." "Consider it done, Chief," Thal said, cutting the comms before Morrow could blabber on about quotas and margins. Carla raised an eyebrow. "Think you'll get a bonus for babysitting the colonist's sanity?" Thal snorted. "If by bonus you mean a stern talking to when it all goes to crap, then definitely." As they sat in silence, the weight of the situation settled over them like a thick smog. Thal drummed his fingers on the desk, eyes distant. "You ever think," he began, breaking the quiet, "that maybe we're not supposed to be here?" Carla shrugged. "Every day." They didn't have time to explore the existential crisis further because a frantic banging at the door interrupted them. It swung open to reveal one of the colony's engineers, a young woman whose name Thal couldn't remember. "It's happening again," she gasped, eyes wide with terror. Thal and Carla exchanged glances before rising from their seats. "Lead the way," Thal said, grabbing his gear. They followed the engineer through the labyrinthine corridors, past flickering lights and exposed wiring. The colony had always been a patchwork of quick fixes and temporary solutions, and it showed. They arrived at a section of the colony that was supposed to be off-limits, something about structural integrity and potential vacuum exposure. But Thal figured it was more about not wanting to deal with the paperwork if someone got sucked out into space. Inside, they found chaos. Another crew member, this one a burly miner with a face that suggested he'd lost several bar fights, was thrashing about, shouting incoherently. "He was fine," the engineer said, her voice tinged with panic. "And then, this." Thal approached cautiously, hands raised. "Hey there, big guy, let's take it easy, yeah." The miner turned wild eyes on him, a growl rumbling from his throat. "They won't stop, can't stop them." Carla moved beside Thal, stun baton in hand. "Looks like the same deal as Jeremiah." "Yeah," Thal agreed, not taking his eyes off the miner. "But this one's bigger." With surprising speed, the miner lunged at them, forcing Thal and Carla to scramble backward. The confined space didn't do them any favors, and Thal stumbled, barely keeping his balance. "Calm down," Thal shouted, though he knew it was pointless. Carla swung the baton, connecting with the miner's side. It crackled with electricity, and the miner convulsed before collapsing in a heap. "Well, that's one way to do it," Thal said, catching his breath. Carla wiped her brow. "I'm too old for this crap." The engineer looked at them, eyes pleading. "What do we do?" Thal shrugged, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. "We deal with it like everything else. One mess at a time." As they worked to secure the miner for transport, Thal couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something big and terrible. Something that chuckled in the dark corners of their little rock, waiting for its moment. And in the back of his mind, a voice whispered, what if Jeremiah was right? The med bay was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that made Thal nervous, like the moment just before some idiot set off a firework indoors. Medical was always a place of hushed tones and sterile smells, but today it felt particularly tense, which made sense, given that a miner had just tried to turn Thal into space dust. He looked over at the colony's resident biologist, Dr. Leora Neem, who was peering into a microscope as if it owed her money. Her lab coat had seen better days, but around here, everything looked a bit worse for wear, much like his own patients. "So, Doc, how's our minor friend doing?" Thal asked, leaning against the wall in what he hoped was a casual manner. He didn't quite manage it, leaning wasn't his forte. Dr. Neem didn't look up. "He's sedated, stable. For now." "Good to hear. Do you think this is connected to our electric-haired prophet, or is it just coincidence?" "You know what they say about coincidences," she muttered, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that suggested she'd seen too many things she wished she could unsee. "They're just a lazy way of explaining something you don't understand." "Great, so we're in the middle of a conspiracy," Thal replied, flashing a sardonic smile. "Just what I needed to spice up my Tuesday." Dr. Neem sighed, rubbing her temples. "There's something in their blood. I haven't identified it yet, but it's different." "Different how?" "Different like a grocer calling a grenade unique because it isn't a tomato." "Ah, so it's one of those differences," Thal said, folding his arms. "You think it's alien, Doctor?" Neem hesitated, the word hanging between them like a bad smell. "I can't say for sure, but it's not something I've seen before. And that's saying something in this hellhole." "Well, if it turns out to be a hostile takeover, we can always try negotiating," Thal quipped. "You know, offer them a deal on property taxes or something." She rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile there. "Sure, and maybe they'll accept payment in dust bunnies." Just then, Carla strolled in, her expression one of perpetual exasperation. "I leave you alone for 5 minutes and we're already talking about aliens. Hey, you know how it is. Get one little alien parasite and suddenly everyone's a believer," Thal said with a wink. "Speaking of believers," Carla said, "rumor mill's already up and running. Half the colony thinks we're all going to wake up with tentacles tomorrow. That'll give the cosplay community something to talk about," Thal said, shaking his head. "There's more," Carla continued, ignoring Thal's attempts at levity. "Some folks are actually excited. They're thinking this might be some kind of upgrade." "Upgrade?" Dr. Neem arched an eyebrow. "They're not getting it. This isn't a new version of them. It's a corruption." "Tell that to the new paragons of our little rock," Carla said, using air quotes so exaggerated you could see them from orbit. Thal frowned. "So now we've got factions. Perfect. Just what we need, a civil war of the stupid." "Not factions exactly, but there's definitely a divide. Some want to embrace whatever is happening, others are already planning their escape." "Escape where?" Thal asked, incredulous. "We're on the damn moon." "Doesn't stop them from trying. Human stupidity is the most powerful force in the universe," Carla replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Dr. Neem sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. "If we don't find out what's going on soon, this could spiral out of control." "Yeah, well, considering our illustrious leader is Moro, I give it 2 days before chaos ensues," Thal said. "Any ideas on where to start, Doc?" "More tests," she replied. "But I'll need samples. Blood, preferably from the affected." "Great," Thal muttered. "Because chasing down paranoid miners and self-proclaimed prophets wasn't already on my to-do list." Carla patted him on the back. "Look on the bright side, at least you won't be bored." "Bored? Nah. Just dead, probably," Thal replied, pulling himself away from the wall. "Let's get cracking. The sooner we figure this out, the sooner I can get back to ignoring the rest of my responsibilities." "Good luck, Doctor," Neem said, her tone making it clear she thought they'd need it. Thal and Carla left the med bay and headed back into the dimly lit corridors of Selene's bastion. It was a place where dreams went to die and then resurrected as nightmares. Dust bunnies scuttled in the corners, and the hum of machinery was a constant reminder that home was just a collection of metal and duct tape precariously perched on a hostile rock. "Got a plan?" Carla asked as they walked, her footsteps echoing in the empty passage. "Not so much a plan as a vague idea I'm hoping won't get us killed," Thal replied, adjusting his badge, which still refused to do anything useful. "Vague ideas are your specialty," Carla noted with a smirk. "Yep, right next to sarcasm and wishful thinking." "But hey, they haven't failed us yet." They rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a group of colonists deep in conversation. The whispers stopped abruptly as Thal and Carla approached, replaced by wary glances and nervous shuffling. "Morning," Thal said, offering a nod. The colonists mumbled half-hearted greetings, eyes darting away as if afraid of what they might see if they looked too closely. "Friendly bunch," Carla muttered under her breath. "Fear does that. Makes people see monsters where there are just men," Thal replied, unconsciously touching the stun baton at his side. As they continued, the tension in the air was palpable. It clung to their skin like the ever-present dust. Thal knew they were walking a tightrope, and one wrong step would send the entire colony tumbling into chaos. "Where to first?" Carla asked, glancing at him. "Let's pay a visit to processing, see if we can find anyone else who's feeling less than human." "Processing? Great. My favorite place," Carla said sarcastically. "Why does it always smell like despair in there?" "Probably because that's where hope goes to die," Thal suggested. "But who knows? Maybe we'll get lucky." They reached processing, where the chaos was as constant as the gravity keeping them from floating off into the void. The noise was a cacophony of shouted orders, clattering crates, and the occasional swear word flung like a grenade. At the center of it all was a man whose hair looked like it had been styled by a hurricane. He stood with a manic energy that suggested he was either the most awake person alive or hadn't slept in a decade. "We've got a question for you," Thal said, approaching with caution. The man, Kel was his name, though Thal only remembered because he'd once punched him for trying to steal supplies, glanced over, his eyes like pinwheels. "Yeah, what is it? Seen anyone acting strange?" Carla asked, avoiding Kel's gaze. "Stranger than usual, I mean." Kel barked a laugh, the sound more like a cough. "Whole damn place is strange. But yeah, a couple folks came through here. Eyes all wide, twitchy as hell. Made me think they'd seen something nasty." "Any idea where they went?" Thal pressed. Kel shrugged with the kind of indifference only someone who'd seen too much could muster. "Heard him talking about the old storage units. Might find him hiding out there." "Thanks," Thal said, though he doubted Kel cared about gratitude. As they made their way to the storage units, Carla frowned. "Storage units? Really? You'd think they'd aim for somewhere with a view." "It's not like we're living in luxury," Thal replied. "But hey, if hiding amidst expired rations and old equipment floats their boat." The storage units were tucked away in a part of the colony that was best described as out of sight, out of mind. The corridors narrowed here, making it feel like they were descending into the bowels of Selene's bastion. They found the entrance, a heavy door that creaked ominously as Thal pushed it open. The air was stale, filled with the scent of dust and disuse. "Home sweet home," Carla muttered, wrinkling her nose. Inside, the units were piled high with crates and containers, a veritable maze of forgotten supplies. Somewhere in the dimness, Thal heard a scuffle, a footstep, a whisper of movement. "Hello," Thal called out, keeping his voice steady. "Anyone here?" Silence, broken only by the distant hum of machinery. Then a voice, low, hesitant. "Who's asking?" "Just your friendly neighborhood trouble solver," Thal replied. "We're not here to hurt you, just want to talk." A figure emerged from behind a stack of crates, a woman with dark hair and eyes that gleamed with suspicion. She looked at them, her expression unreadable. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of defiance. "To understand what's happening," Carla answered, her tone gentler than usual. The woman folded her arms, a protective gesture. "And if I don't want to tell you, then you'll keep hiding here while the rest of the colony loses their minds," Thal said bluntly. "Look, we're just trying to get to the bottom of this, for all our sakes." She hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. But make it quick." Thal glanced at Carla, who nodded in encouragement. They stepped forward, closing the gap. "What's your name?" Thal asked. "Emery." "All right, Emery," Thal said. "What's going on? Why hide out here?" Emery glanced around, as if expecting someone to leap from the shadows. "It's like something's waking up inside us. I can't explain it, but it's powerful. Some of us, we can do things we couldn't before." "Things like what?" Carla pressed. Emery raised a hand, and a small ball of light flickered to life above her palm, a pale glow that cast long shadows on the walls. Neat trick, Thal said, his voice light but his mind racing. And the others? Some are scared. Others think it's a gift. A few of us, we're trying to figure it out. But it's hard to know who to trust. Trust is scarce as water these days, Thal muttered, scratching his chin. But if you want help, we need to know everything. Emery extinguished the light, her expression guarded. We're not looking for a fight, just answers. And we're not looking to make life harder for anyone, Carla added. But the more people know, the better chance we have of stopping this from getting worse. Emery studied them for a moment, then sighed. All right, I'll tell you what I know, but you have to promise not to turn this into a witch hunt. Thal nodded, a sense of relief mingling with the dread. Fair enough. As Emery began to speak, Thal felt the weight of the colony pressing down on him. They were teetering on the edge of something big and terrible, and he had no idea if they could pull back before it all went to hell. But for now, he listened, hoping for the best while bracing for the worst. The med bay smelled like antiseptic and bad decisions. Thal glanced at Dr. Leora Neem, who was up to her elbows in a petri dish filled with something that looked suspiciously like a nightmare's afterbirth. She looked up, her brow furrowed with the kind of concentration that would have made a monk feel underdressed. Find anything yet, Doc? Thal asked, leaning against the wall. The badge on his chest blinked in lazy protest. Still useless. Dr. Neem looked up, her eyes unreadable behind the glare of her glasses. If by anything you mean alien parasites, yes. If you mean hope for a peaceful resolution. Not so much. Thal chuckled, though the sound was more cynical than cheerful. Alien parasites. I knew my day couldn't be complete without them. Carla, perched on a stool that looked like it might collapse under the weight of her sarcasm, chimed in. Great, so now we're dealing with space lice. What's the prognosis, Doc? Prognosis? Dr. Neem snorted, wiping her hands on her lab coat. If we don't find a way to contain this, we're looking at a full-blown infestation. And by infestation, I mean our charming little lunar colony becoming a buffet. Lovely, Thal said. Guessing Arvin Selk's not going to be thrilled about this. Thrilled, Doctor. Neem laughed, a short, bitter sound. He's more likely to shove his head in the sand and hope the problem eats someone else first. Selk's got the backbone of a jellyfish, Carla added, and about as much foresight. Speaking of which, we should probably break the news, Thal sighed, straightening up. Maybe he'll surprise us and actually do something. Dr. Neem gave him a look that suggested she believed in unicorns more than Selk's leadership. Good luck with that, she said dryly. Thal and Carla left the med bay, stepping back into the maze of gray corridors that made up Selene's bastion. The place was a marvel of human ingenuity, if by marvel you meant a testament to half-assed engineering and cut corners. Dust motes swirled in the dim light, and Thal kicked at one absently. So, what do we tell him? Carla asked, falling into step beside him. The truth, Thal ventured, though he couldn't quite keep the sarcasm out of his voice. Alien parasites are turning some of us into glow sticks, and if we don't act fast, we're all hosed, Carla laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound. Yeah, I'm sure he'll love that. But hey, at least we won't be bored. They reached the governor's office, a glorified closet with delusions of grandeur. The door was ajar, which Thal took as a good sign. At least they wouldn't have to break it down. Inside, Arvin Selk was hunched over his desk, peering at a screen that cast an unhealthy glow over his features. Thal knocked on the doorframe, announcing their presence. Selk, he said, putting on his best "I'm not here to ruin your day" face. We need to talk. Selk looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and dread. Marwick, Carla. To what do I owe the pleasure? Bad news, I'm afraid, Thal replied, stepping inside. We've got a bit of a situation, Selk sighed, rubbing his temples. Of course we do. Go on, lay it on me. Alien parasites, Carla said, cutting to the chase. They're affecting some of the colonists, giving them abilities. And before you ask, no, it's not the good kind of abilities. Selk's face paled to the color of old paper. Parasites? Abilities? What kind of abilities? The kind that might get us all killed, Thal replied. We need to act, Selk. We need containment. We need a plan. Selk sat back, his chair creaking ominously. Containment, a plan. He shook his head, looking more defeated than Thal felt comfortable with. If we go public with this, there'll be panic. Economic collapse. You know what that means for us. Yeah, Carla said, but if we don't do anything, there won't be an economy left to collapse. Just a bunch of corpses. Selk was silent for a long moment, weighing his options like a man trying to choose between the noose and the guillotine. All right, he said finally, his voice resigned. I'll see what we can do. Quietly. But if this blows up, it's on your heads. Wouldn't have it any other way, Thal said, turning to leave. Thanks for nothing, as usual. As they left the office, Carla shook her head. Well, that was productive. About as productive as punching a black hole, Thal agreed. But at least we tried. The corridors were busier now. Colonists moving with a nervous energy that suggested word was spreading faster than Selk's incompetence. Thal could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to choke on. Time for some damage control, Carla suggested. Thal nodded. Let's check in with the factions. They're bound to be gearing up for something stupid. They headed to one of the makeshift gathering areas, where a group of colonists had gathered in a heated discussion. The atmosphere was combustible, like a tinderbox waiting for an excuse. Hey, Thal called out, raising a hand. What's going on? A man with a scar that looked like a misplaced zipper turned to face them. Marwick, we were just discussing our options. You mean like starting a revolution? Thal asked, cocking an eyebrow. The man shrugged. Some of us are tired of waiting for Selk to grow a pair. If there are parasites, we need to protect ourselves. Yeah, a woman chimed in. We can't trust the leadership. They'll just sit back and watch us die. Thal exchanged a glance with Carla. Okay, look, he said, addressing the group. I get it, but running off half-cocked isn't gonna help. We need to work together. Another man spat. You mean trust Selk? No thanks. I'd rather kiss a plasma torch. Fair point, Carla said, but at least hear us out. We're trying to figure this out, same as you. The crowd muttered among themselves, skepticism and fear a potent cocktail. Listen, Thal continued, we're all stuck on this rock together. If we start turning on each other, the parasites are the least of our worries. We need to find a way to fight this, but smart. Not with pitchforks. All right, the zipper-scarred man said reluctantly. We'll give you some time. But not much. Appreciate it, Thal replied. We'll need all the help we can get. As they moved on, Carla shook her head. That's one fire contained. 1,000,000 more to go. Yeah, Thal said, rubbing his temples. I'm starting to miss the days when our biggest problem was dodging debt collectors. The tension in the colony was palpable, a living entity that seemed to grow with each passing hour. Thal could feel it in the air, the way people moved, the way they spoke. It was like everyone was on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Do you think this is how humanity ends? Carla mused as they walked. Not with a bang, but with a parasitic whimper, Thal chuckled darkly. I always figured we'd go down in flames, but I guess this is more poetic. In a twisted way, their conversation was punctuated by the sound of distant shouting, a scuffle perhaps, or an argument that had gone too far. Thal's hand drifted to his stun baton, a reflexive gesture that spoke volumes about life on the moon. Sounds like someone's found their breaking point, Carla said, her voice laced with grim amusement. Let's hope it's not contagious, Thal replied, picking up the pace. Last thing we need is a riot. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a small crowd, two factions squaring off with all the subtlety of a supernova. Words flew like daggers, each side determined to outshout the other. Enough, Thal barked, stepping between them. We're all knackered and scared, but fighting each other isn't solving anything. A woman with fire in her eyes glared at him. Says who? You think you can just waltz in here and tell us what to do? Says the guy who's trying to keep you from getting yourself killed, Thal shot back. Look, we're all in this mess together. The parasites don't care who you are. They are equal opportunity bastards. There was a pause, the kind that stretches out and makes you wonder if you've just talked yourself into a beating. Then one of the men lowered his fists, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and frustration. Fine, he grunted, but this better not be more of Selk's bullshit. It's not, Carla assured him. We're trying to find a solution, but we need you all on the same page. Trust us, when we find it, you'll be the first to know, Thal added. Hell, you'll probably hear me shouting it from the rooftops. The crowd began to disperse, grumbling but mollified for the moment. Thal watched them go, feeling the weight of the world, or at least this part of it, on his shoulders. Think that'll hold? Carla asked, crossing her arms. For now, Thal said, though he didn't sound convinced. But if we don't get a handle on this soon, we'll be knee-deep in chaos, Carla finished for him. So what's next? Back to Dr. Neem. We need a plan, and we need it yesterday. They retraced their steps, the colony's gloom seeping into their bones like the chill of an uncaring universe. Thal's mind whirled with half-formed strategies and desperate gambles, none of which seemed likely to pan out. Hey Thal, Carla said suddenly. Yeah, do you ever wonder if maybe we're the parasites and this rock is just trying to shake us off? Thal snorted, the sound halfway between a laugh and a groan. If that's the case, I hope it's got a hell of a plan. 'Cause we're not going anywhere without a fight. There was a grim determination in his voice, a defiance that seemed to echo in the metal corridors around them. They might be outnumbered, outgunned, and out of their depth, but they weren't out of the fight just yet. And as long as they had breath in their lungs and stubbornness in their hearts, Thal figured that was good enough. For now, anyway. Thal Marwick stepped into the med bay, greeted by the usual cocktail of antiseptic and desperation. He spotted Dr. Leora Neem hunched over a microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. Hey Doc, Thal called, leaning against the doorframe, his flashlight flickering like it was powered by wishes and dreams. Dr. Neem looked up, her expression one of skepticism layered with a healthy dose of what now? Marwick, what do you need this time? Another band-aid for a bullet wound. Thal grinned, the kind of grin that didn't reach his eyes. More like a miracle cure for stupidity. Got a situation brewing at the greenhouse. What's new? She muttered, returning her gaze to the microscope. That place is a disaster waiting to happen. Well, the wait's over, he replied. Some infected folks have decided to play king of the hill with our oxygen farm. Dr. Neem looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. You're serious? About as serious as a heart attack in 0G, Thal replied. They've barricaded themselves in, and I don't think it's to have a tea party. Carla, who had been lingering by the med bay's entrance like a shadow that refused to take a hint, joined in. We've got to figure out what they're up to before they turn this place into their personal terrarium. Dr. Neem ran a hand through her hair, which looked like it hadn't seen a comb in weeks. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Walk in and ask them nicely, Thal shrugged. We were thinking something a little less suicidal. Maybe sneak in, see what they're growing in their little garden of horrors. Great, Carla said, rolling her eyes. Because sneaking into a room full of potentially homicidal lunatics is right up there on my bucket list. Thal nodded. Look, we don't have many options. If those parasites are turning people into walking glow sticks, we need to know why, Doctor. Neem sighed, the kind of sigh that said she had a dozen better things to do but knew she'd end up doing this one anyway. Fine, but if you get yourselves killed, don't come crying to me. Wouldn't dream of it, Doc, Thal replied. We'll save the crying for the after-party. The lunar greenhouse was a marvel of questionable design. A dome of cracked glass and duct-tape panels that somehow managed to keep the atmosphere in and the vacuum out. Thal and Carla crouched in the shadows, peering through the grimy windows. Looks like a party in there, Carla whispered, nodding towards the figures moving about inside. And we're not invited. Good, Thal said. I hate parties. They watched as the infected colonists moved with an eerie synchronicity, tending to the plants with a devotion that bordered on reverence. Occasionally one would stop, eyes glowing faintly, and Thal felt a shiver run down his spine. What's the plan, fearless leader? Carla asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Thal considered their options, which ranged from bad to worse. We need to get closer, see what they're up to, but quietly. Quiet as a mouse, Carla replied. A mouse with a death wish. They crept around the perimeter, sticking to the shadows like they were long-lost friends. Thal's heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of just how bad an idea this was. But someone had to do it, and since they were short on volunteers— "Over here," Carla hissed, pointing to a small service hatch. "This might be our way in." Thal nodded, moving to the hatch and examining the lock. "Piece of cake," he muttered, pulling out a small tool from his belt. "Just gotta." The lock clicked open with a reluctant groan, and Thal let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "See? Easy? Yeah, you're a regular locksmith," Carla quipped. "Now let's get this over with." They slipped inside, the air thick with humidity and the scent of earth and chlorophyll. The plants loomed around them, casting long shadows that seemed to shift and sway like living things. Thal found it disconcerting, like the greenery had conspired to swallow them whole. "Keep your eyes peeled," he whispered, as if the plants might overhear. They moved deeper into the greenhouse, careful to avoid the infected colonists who drifted about like ghosts. Thal felt a prickling at the back of his neck, the unsettling sensation of being watched by eyes that weren't quite human anymore. "There," Carla said softly, pointing to a cluster of plants that seemed to pulse with an unnatural glow. "That doesn't look normal." Thal frowned, creeping closer to get a better look. The plants were unlike anything he'd seen before, their leaves shimmering with an iridescent sheen that seemed to defy the laws of nature and good taste. "Well, that's not from the seed catalog," Thal muttered, reaching out to touch one of the leaves. "Careful," Carla warned, watching him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for defusing bombs or watching bad reality TV. As his fingers brushed the leaf, a jolt of electricity shot up his arm and he snatched his hand back with a curse. "Damn thing's alive." "Alive and kicking," Carla said, eyeing the plant warily. "We need to get a sample, take it back to Dr. Neem." "Sure, because I'm just dying to carry a piece of that back with us," Thal said, rubbing his hand. They worked quickly, cutting a small sample and stowing it in a container that Thal hoped was as airtight as the label claimed. Just as they were about to make their escape, a noise behind them made them freeze. "Who's there?" a voice called, sharp and suspicious. Thal exchanged a glance with Carla. "Time to go," he whispered, and they slipped out the way they'd come, hearts pounding like they were running from the devil himself. As they made their way back to the med bay, Thal felt a sense of foreboding settle over him. The plants, the parasites, the infected colonists, it was all connected, and none of it boded well for the future of Selene's Bastion. Back in the med bay, Dr. Neem examined the plant sample with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "This is definitely not indigenous," she said, her voice tinged with awe. "Yeah, found that out the hard way," Thal replied, holding up his hand. "Still got the tingles." Carla shook her head. "So what do we do about it, Doctor?" Neem sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, preferably with a large bottle of something intoxicating. "I'll need to run some tests, see what we're dealing with. Any chance of a quick fix?" Thal asked, though he knew the answer before he'd finished speaking. "Quick fix, Doctor," Neem snorted. "I don't even know what this is, let alone how to counteract it, but I'll do my best." "That's all we can ask for," Thal said, though he couldn't quite keep the doubt out of his voice. "As Doctor Neem set to work, Thal leaned against the wall, his mind racing with possibilities and none of them particularly pleasant. The situation was spiraling out of control and he felt like a man trying to catch rain with a sieve. "Think we'll ever get out of this mess?" Carla asked, breaking the silence. Thal shrugged. "Depends on what you mean by get out. Alive, maybe. Sane." "Doubtful," Carla chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "At least we won't be bored." "No," Thal agreed. "But I'd trade a little boredom for some good news any day." "Well," Carla said, "let's hope Dr. Neem can work her magic." "We'll need more than magic for this," Thal replied, glancing at the doctor, who was already lost in her work. "We'll need a miracle." As the hours ticked by, the med bay became a bubble of tense anticipation, broken only by the occasional beeping of machines and the relentless click of Dr. Neem's instruments. Thal paced like a caged animal, the weight of the colony's fate pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Finally, Dr. Neem straightened, rubbing her eyes. "I think I've found something," she said, her voice hoarse from hours of concentration. Thal stopped pacing, turning to face her. Good news, I hope. Depends on your definition, she replied, handing him a data pad. The plants are symbiotic with the parasites. They're amplifying each other. Thal frowned at the screen, the words swimming before his eyes. Symbiotic, so what? They're working together, pretty much, Dr. Neem said. The plants produce a compound that enhances the parasites' abilities, makes them more efficient. Wonderful, Carla muttered. So they're like a superfood for parasites. Exactly, Dr. Neem said, her expression grim. And if those infected colonists have been interacting with these plants, their abilities are going to be off the charts. Thal let out a low whistle. And we thought we had problems before. Any idea where they came from? Carla asked, her voice tense. Dr. Neem shook her head. Nothing I've seen before. Could be native to another planet or maybe engineered somewhere. Engineered, Thal repeated, the word sending a chill down his spine. So this was intentional, possibly, Dr. Neem said. But without more information, it's hard to say. Great, Thal said. So we're dealing with supercharged zombies and a mystery science project all in one. Pretty much, Dr. Neem replied. But if we can find a way to disrupt the symbiosis, we might have a fighting chance. Any idea how to do that? Carla asked. Working on it, Dr. Neem said. But it'll take time. Time, Thal echoed, the word tasting bitter in his mouth. The one thing we don't have. As they stood in the med bay, the weight of their predicament settled over them like a shroud. The colony was a powder keg, and they were running out of matches to keep the inevitable explosion at bay. But despite the odds, Thal felt a flicker of determination. They'd faced impossible situations before, and they'd find a way through this one. They had to. Because if they didn't, they'd all end up as just another footnote in the history of humanity's failures. And Thal Marwick wasn't about to let that happen. Not on his watch. The colony was, predictably, falling apart quicker than a budget shuttle after launch. Thal Marwick found himself in the middle of it all, which was no real surprise considering his uncanny knack for bad timing and worse luck. He stood in what used to be the bustling heart of Selene's Bastion, now a ghost town with the ambience of a haunted house without the charm. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind that made you paranoid enough to start checking for things that go bump in the night, or in this case, infected colonists who'd taken up gardening. Remind me again why we don't just pack up and leave this rock, Thal muttered, more to himself than anyone else. His flashlight flickered, doing its best impression of a disco ball without the fun. Carla, his reluctant partner in this latest suicidal venture, sidled up next to him. She was armed with a stun baton that had a tendency to overdo it, because the next shuttle doesn't leave until Tuesday. And today is Wednesday, Thal sighed. Of last week, bingo. So what's the plan? Thal glanced at her. You're assuming I've got one, Carla smirked. Just trying to be optimistic. Yeah, well, optimism's for people with something left to lose. Thal peered around the corner, flashlight beam dancing erratically. The corridor was empty, too empty. Made you miss the days when overpopulation was the problem. The colony's oxygen farm, aka the greenhouse, aka the new favorite haunt of the bug-eyed infected, was on the brink of going full hive mind. They needed to act fast, but Thal felt about as useful as a solar panel in a snowstorm. All right, Thal said, more to convince himself than Carla, we find Dr. Neem. I don't know, maybe she's got a miracle hidden up her sleeve. Or at least a better idea than mine, which is running and screaming. An oldie but a goodie, Carla said, her voice tinged with the kind of humor that only showed up when you were knee-deep in trouble. Lead on, fearless leader. Thal led them through the winding corridors, every creak and groan of the structure making him twitchy. Selene's Bastion was a disaster waiting to happen, and they were all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Or the ceiling in this case. The med bay was just as they'd left it, filled with the kind of sterile smells and hushed tones that made you want to whisper even when there was no one to hear. Dr. Leora Neem was still at it, working diligently under harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look a shade too green. Got any good news, Doc? Thal asked, swinging open the door without any ceremony. Subtlety was for people not on the brink of a parasitic apocalypse. Dr. Neem looked up, dark circles under her eyes suggesting that sleep had been a distant memory for some time. Good news. You must have the wrong med bay figures, Thal replied. How's our plant friend? Invasive, she said, gesturing to the plant sample under a microscope, like a bad houseguest. You know, the kind that eats all your food and never shuts up, charming, Carla said, peering over the doctor's shoulder. So can you stop it, stop it? Dr. Neem half laughed, half snorted. I'm still trying to figure out what it is. Thal leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Confidence was something he wore like a second-hand suit, ill-fitting and occasionally threadbare. Well, keep at it. We'll do a perimeter sweep. Last time I checked, we were running low on humans. Don't worry, Carla added, I'll keep him from getting himself killed. Or worse, bitten. Oh joy, Thal muttered as they headed back into the corridor. They hadn't made it far when the lights flickered ominously, casting everything into a strobe of shadow and light. This isn't creepy at all, Carla remarked dryly. I mean, who doesn't love an impromptu horror show? Thal squinted into the half-darkness. I dunno about you, but I'm getting real tired of living in a B-movie. As they edged cautiously forward, a sound stopped them dead in their tracks, a low, guttural growl that sent their nerves skittering like startled mice. Infected, Carla whispered, her grip tightening on the baton. Sounds like it, Thal said. Though it could just be my stomach. I'm starving. Only you could make jokes at a time like this. Thal flashed her a grin, though it probably looked more like a grimace. Well, I figure if we're going out, might as well go out laughing, right? Before she could respond, the source of the noise came into view. One of the infected colonists was stumbling their way, eyes glowing with that unsettling, otherworldly light. Thal stiffened. Time to earn your keep, he said, nodding towards Carla's baton. She flipped it on, the zap of electricity echoing loudly in the confined space. You know, I never wanted to be a zombie wrangler, really. With all those skills. I'm shocked. Rolling her eyes, Carla stepped forward. Watch my back, Thal did as instructed, keeping his eyes peeled for any other surprises. The infected colonist moved with an odd, jerky grace, like a marionette with a sadistic puppet master. Carla was quick and efficient, jabbing the baton into the infected side. It dropped with a thud, twitching like a fish out of water. One down, she said, not bothering to hide her disdain. One down, a colony to go, Thal replied, scanning the hallway. They didn't have time to rest on their laurels. More noises echoed down the corridor, and Thal felt that familiar knot of dread tighten in his gut. This was spiraling out of control faster than a politician's promises. Think it's time to regroup, Carla suggested, and Thal didn't argue. They made their way back toward the med bay, but the universe, in its infinite cruelty, had different plans. A group of infected lurched out of the shadows, cutting off their path. Of course, Thal muttered. Why not? He had no choice but to draw his own weapon, a badge that was more for show than anything else. Still, it was something. And in a world gone mad, even illusions were better than nothing. Back to your stations, he called out, waving the badge like it would somehow command respect. To his utter lack of surprise, it didn't work. The infected advanced, unfazed. Great plan, Carla said, shifting into a fighting stance. What's next? Asked them nicely. Thal shrugged. Was gonna try bribery. Seemed worth a shot. But before he could elaborate on his terrible idea, the infected lunged. They were a blur of motion, too fast, too strong, a nightmare given flesh. Thal and Carla fought, but it was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with a teacup. A particularly persistent infected managed to get under Thal's guard, and the next thing he knew, everything went dark. Asterisk, 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 when Thal came to, he was in a dimly lit room that smelled like old socks and stale desperation. His head throbbed in time with his heartbeat, and for a moment, he felt like the universe's worst hangover. Well, this isn't my bed, he groaned, attempting to sit up. Prophet, the wiry self-proclaimed seer who liked to hang around and make vague predictions, loomed over him. Ah, you're awake. Good. The stars have much to say. Stars can shove it, Thal muttered. Where am I? Captured, Prophet said, his voice a cryptic monotone. The infected brought you here. They have plans. Thal echoed, his brain still sluggish. What kind of plans? Prophet shrugged, which was not reassuring. It's not clear, but the future holds many possibilities. Great, Thal said. That's helpful. Suddenly the door creaked open and Arvin Selk walked in. If leadership was measured by how quickly one could run from problems, Arvin was an undisputed champion. Thal, Arvin greeted, the word dripping with unease. How are you? Alive, surprisingly, Thal muttered. Didn't expect to see you here. Well, things are complicated, Arvin said, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The colony is on the edge. No kidding, Thal replied. You got any ideas to stop this? Or are you just here to gloat? Arvin shifted uncomfortably. I'm working on it. Sure you are, Thal said, skepticism heavy in his tone. Meanwhile, across the colony, Dr. Neem was having a day that could only be described as hellacious. The med bay was chaos, and she was juggling more crises than a circus performer with too many balls. When Carla burst in, breathless and wild-eyed, Dr. Neem didn't even flinch. More bad news. She asked with the resignation of someone who'd already accepted that the universe was out to get her. Thal's been taken, Carla managed between gulps of air. The infected have him, Doctor. Neem pinched the bridge of her nose. Of course they do, she muttered. Why make anything easy? We need to get him back, Carla insisted, urgency in her voice. I'm aware, Doctor, Neem said, but it's not like we can just stroll in there and ask politely. Carla nodded, frustration etched into her features. So what do? I keep working on a solution, Doctor. Neem replied, her focus returning to the plant sample. And you? Find a way to survive until then. Easy, Carla said, sarcasm hardening her words. I'll just avoid getting bitten by supercharged zombies. Glad we've got a plan, Doctor. Neem replied, shooting her a wry smile. As Carla left to regroup and strategize, or whatever passed for strategy in a situation like this, Doctor. Neem turned her attention back to the microscope. Somewhere in the mess of cells and alien compounds was a solution. There had to be. Back in his makeshift prison, Thal was busy trying to think his way out of the predicament. Sadly, the best he'd come up with involved a lot of wishful thinking and possibly divine intervention. So, he said, looking at Prophet, any visions of me getting out of here? Prophet smiled enigmatically. The future is a tapestry woven with uncertainty. Gee, thanks, Thal muttered. Real crystal clear. The infected colonists, their eyes glowing with that eerie light, kept watch. It was like being babysat by a group of overzealous robots programmed for mayhem. All Thal could do now was wait. Wait and hope Carla found a way to rescue him before things went from bad to worse. And knowing his luck, that wouldn't take long. Meanwhile, outside the crumbling confines of the colony, the harsh lunar landscape went on, indifferent to the chaos unfolding within. It was a reminder that in the grand scheme of things, Selene's bastion was just another speck in the universe. But for the people trapped inside, it was their whole world, and their world was falling apart. Thal Marwick woke up to a skull-splitting headache and the curious sensation that he'd become the reluctant star of a low-budget sci-fi series rejected by every major network. The room he found himself in was poorly lit, with shadows skirting the walls like predators waiting for a moment of weakness. Not quite the heroic setting he'd imagined when joining the colony, but beggars couldn't be choosers, especially when they were about to become zombie chow. Prophet, the wiry, self-proclaimed soothsayer with all the reliable foresight of a magic 8-ball, sat cross-legged in the corner. Ah, Thal, the stars have spoken. Great, Thal grumbled, rubbing his temples. Do they have anything useful to say, or are they just spitting out fortune cookie wisdom? The universe is a complex tapestry. Save it, Thal cut in. I'm drowning here and you're handing me a thimble. Prophet shrugged with the ease of someone who'd seen it all, possibly in a psychedelic haze. You're here because you have something the infected want. Thal snorted. If it's my charming personality, someone's taken a serious wrong turn. Prophet leaned closer, his eyes glinting with an unsettling mix of insight and madness. You can communicate with them. Yeah. Well, I'd love to hear the sales pitch they used to sell you on that idea. Thal said flatly. Prophet pointed to his head, tapping his temple like he was trying to jump-start a dead battery. The parasites. They speak through thought in dreams. You can hear them too. Thal opened his mouth, ready to dismiss the idea as crazy talk, but stopped himself. Memories flickered on the edge of his consciousness, snatches of whispered thoughts, alien voices threading through his mind like background static. "You're saying these things are chatty?" Thal asked, skepticism warring with the beginnings of understanding. Prophet nodded with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for religious ceremonies or tax audits. "They seek a connection. They may not be what we think, right? Because brain-eating parasites are known for their great conversational skills." Thal's sarcasm was a defense mechanism, as instinctive as breathing. "Believe or don't," Prophet said with a shrug that suggested he'd seen too many doubters in his time. "But this is your way out." Thal sighed, weighed down by the prospect of having to negotiate with space parasites. Communicating with the infected. It was far from ideal, but it was the only plan on the table, and plans were in short supply these days. Meanwhile, in the med bay, Dr. Leora Neem was having a hell of a day, which was saying something in a place where hell was often the best-case scenario. She was up to her elbows in alien biology and trying desperately not to think about how much she missed Earth, where her biggest concern was student loan debt rather than zombie apocalypse. Carla stormed in, eyes blazing and ready for war. "We need to get Thal back. Now." "When did I become the crisis hotline?" Dr. Neem muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "Look, Carla, I'm trying to find a way to stop this, but I'm not exactly armed with miracle cures." Carla's impatience was palpable. "We don't have time. He's in there with those things." Dr. Neem pushed her hair back with a sigh. "Fine, but unless you've got a secret weapon tucked in that stun baton, we're out of options." Carla hesitated, then reluctantly shared what she'd learned from a surveillance feed. "The infected. They don't attack each other. They're organized like they're following orders." "Orders, Doctor." Neem's mind spun, the pieces of a new puzzle clicking into place. "You think they're intelligent?" "Something like that. Thal might be able to get through to them." Doctor Neem considered this, the idea as fragile as a new theory but refusing to shake loose. "If they're communicating, maybe there's a way to tap into that frequency." Carla nodded. "Exactly. So what do you suggest?" "Science and desperation," Dr. Neem said wryly, grabbing a hastily assembled device from the counter. "It's a start." Back in captivity, Thal was getting acquainted with insanity's slightly more reasonable cousin, skepticism. He'd leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, trying to sort the hallucination from his own thoughts. The parasite's voices were there, beneath the surface of his consciousness, a relentless murmur like an alien Twitter feed. Focusing, he began to parse the whispers, the words forming images in his mind instead of just noise. It was like tuning a radio, adjusting the dial until the static turned into something recognizable. "We wish to coexist," one voice whispered, surprising him with its clarity. "Coexist," Thal muttered under his breath. "You've got a funny way of showing it." Another voice intervened, colder, more analytical. "We adapt. Survival." "Survival," Thal echoed. "Takes two to tango, you know." "Your survival kinda conflicts with yours." "Mutual benefit," the first voice insisted, a hint of what might have been urgency threading through the thought. Thal's mind raced. If there was a chance to broker some kind of understanding, he had to take it. The colony wouldn't survive much longer otherwise. "What do you need from us?" The response was a pulse of emotion rather than words. "Hunger, fear, a search for sustenance beyond just flesh." "Energy," Thal almost laughed. "Well, if you're looking for a power plant, you picked the wrong colony. We're barely keeping the lights on." The voices murmured in confusion, and Thal realized he'd need to simplify things. "You're looking to live, right? To keep the hive mind going." "Yes," they chorused, a single unified thought. "Then maybe we can work something out." Meanwhile, Carla and Dr. Neem were setting up at the edge of the infected zone, the hastily constructed device humming with potential energy. Dr. Neem adjusted the settings, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Ready when you are, Carla said, her grip tight on her baton, eyes scanning for any threat. Okay, Dr. Neem took a deep breath. If they're using some form of telepathy, we might be able to send a signal back. It's a long shot, but… Carla nodded. Better than doing nothing. The device clicked on, sending out a silent wave meant to bridge the gap between human and parasite. It was a gamble, and both women knew it. But desperation had a way of making impossible things seem possible. In his cell, Thal felt the shift immediately, like a door opening in his mind. The voices grew louder, clearer. A chorus of confusion and curiosity rippled through the connection, and he seized the moment. Listen up, Thal projected his thoughts, hoping the signal from Dr. Neem's device would strengthen his message. We can help each other. But first, stop attacking us. The hive mind responded, a cacophony of doubt and cautious agreement. Explain. Thal struggled to condense his thoughts into something coherent. We need your help to survive. You need yours. If we work together, we can find a balance. But the killing has to stop. The infected in the room paused, their movements faltering as the hive mind deliberated. Seconds stretched like yours, the tension thick enough to choke on. Finally, a single word resonated through Thal's mind, the weight of it heavy with the promise and threat of cooperation. Agreed. Relief washed over Thal, tempered with the knowledge that this was just the start. He had no idea if the plan would hold, if the fragile truce would last, but it was a step. A shaky, uncertain step, a step nonetheless. He opened his eyes to see Prophet watching him with an approving nod. You did it. Yeah, well, Thal muttered, trying to downplay the knot of fear still lodged in his chest. Let's hope it sticks. Prophet's smile was enigmatic, as if he knew more than he let on. The stars will guide us. Sure they will, Thal said, not bothering to hide his doubt. But I'd feel better if we had a backup plan. Meanwhile, Carla and Dr. Neem watched the infected from their makeshift command post. The infected had stopped their assault, standing eerily still as if listening to something only they could hear. It's working, Carla said, disbelief mingling with hope. Don't jinx it, Dr. Neem warned, though a smile tugged at her lips. They both knew this was far from over. The colony was hanging by a thread, and the parasites were an ever-present threat. But for the first time in what felt like forever, the balance had shifted, however slightly, in their favor. Back in his cell, Thal offered Prophet a wry grin. So what's next, wise guy? Prophet shrugged, casting a glance at the door. We wait. Thal sighed, resting his head back against the wall. Waiting was something he was getting used to, not that he enjoyed it. But with a tentative alliance and a barely functional plan, they had a fighting chance. As long as the infected didn't change their minds, or decide they were hungry, or 100 other things that could go wrong. But for now, there was a fragile peace, and in a place like Selene's Bastion, that was as good as a victory. It was the longest day of Thal Marwick's life, and considering his luck, that was saying something. As the colony teetered on the brink, he found a sliver of grim satisfaction in the fact that amidst the chaos, survival wasn't just a matter of brute force or superior firepower. Sometimes, it came down to talking things out with the voices in your head. And if that wasn't absurd enough to laugh about, nothing was. Thal Marwick was having what could only be described as an existential crisis wrapped in a cosmic joke. Not that this was unusual. Existential crises were practically a breakfast staple on Selene's Bastion. But today, the stakes involved a parasitic hive mind and the survival of what remained of the colony. Talk about stressful Mondays. So let me get this straight, Carla said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear with a stun baton that was 1 voltage away from a lawsuit. You're proposing we trust the space parasites that have been trying to snack on our cerebellums to suddenly play nice. More like a ceasefire, Thal muttered, his headache thumping in agreement. They're not exactly giving us the warm fuzzes, but they've agreed to stop the whole face-hugging routine. For now, Carla snorted. Great, we've gone from invasion to passive-aggressive roommates. That's the spirit, Thal replied. Besides, we've got the good doctor working on the communication device, or as I like to call it, the sci-fi Hail Mary. Doctor. Leora Neem was buried in a mess of wires, circuits, and the kind of equipment that usually didn't inspire confidence outside of a mad scientist convention. This thing is less a device and more a wishful thinking amplifier at this point, she said, glancing up at them through dark-circled eyes. That sounds promising, Thal quipped, though his voice was dry enough to start fires. Look, Doctor, Neem sighed, rubbing her temples. All I'm saying is if this works, we might just get through today with our brains intact. If not, well, I hear the afterlife is a nice change of pace. Prophet, ever the optimist, chimed in from his corner. Perhaps the universe will align in our favor, or explode, Thal added. Because both are equally likely at this point. Carla rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a grin. So what's the plan, fearless leader? That was the question of the hour. Thal had never been much of a leader. He was more of a survive until you can point the finger at someone else kind of guy. But with the parasites holding back and the colony in shambles, he had to step up like it or not. We rally the unaffected colonists, Thal said, projecting more confidence than he felt. Get them organized. We're going to need all the hands we can get to push back and secure the greenhouse. The greenhouse, Carla arched a brow. You planning to fight them off with lettuce and hope? Thal chuckled. More like oxygen and desperation. The infected are attracted to the energy fields. If we can reroute the power grid, we might just disrupt their connection long enough to get control. That's a lot of ifs and mights, Doctor. Neem pointed out, her skepticism almost tangible. Welcome to Lunar Colony Management, Thal said, where guesswork is the official language. They spread out through the colony, which was a task akin to herding drunken cats through a minefield. Most of the surviving colonists were huddled in various corners, clutching makeshift weapons and looking like extras from a particularly grim space opera. If they had a plan, it mostly consisted of not dying until somebody else did something heroic. Thal approached a group of miners who'd taken up residence near the processing facility. They were a gritty bunch, their faces etched with the kind of weary determination that came from years of unyielding lunar labor. You guys up for a little colony saving? Thal asked, hoping to channel the spirit of camaraderie and not sound like he was inviting them to a death march. The miners exchanged looks, their leader, a burly woman named Jax, crossing her arms. Depends. What's in it for us? Basic survival, Thal replied, deadpan. And maybe a future where we don't have to worry about alien brain hijackers. Jax grunted, unimpressed. Fine, but if this goes sideways, I'm holding you personally responsible, Marwick. Join the queue, Thal said, not bothering to hide his amusement. With the miners begrudgingly on board, Thal reconvened with Carla and Dr. Neem. The ragtag assembly that called itself the Resistance was an eclectic mix of scientists, engineers, and anyone willing to swing a pipe like their life depended on it, which it did. Time to test your gadget, Carla said, nodding toward Dr. Neem. Leora took a deep breath and activated the device. It emitted a low hum that vibrated through the walls, making Thal's teeth rattle in his skull like dice in a cup. Somewhere in the colony's twisted corridors, the infected paused, their movements stuttering. Looks like they are listening, Thal said. Now let's see if we can teach them a new dance. The Resistance surged forward, half aware that this was either their finest moment or a prelude to a spectacular disaster. They moved through the dimly lit passageways, guided by the flickering beam of Thal's flashlight, which seemed to be in competition with the sun for the title of most inconsistent light source. The infected greeted them like a particularly unfriendly welcoming committee. They hesitated at first, caught in the telepathic crossfire of Dr. Neem's device before lurching forward with an enthusiasm usually reserved for Black Friday sales. Here goes nothing, Thal muttered, raising his voice to project his thoughts. Remember, we're not here to fight, we're here to talk. Talk, we're here to survive. Someone yelled from the back, sending a ripple of nervous laughter through the group. Same difference, Thal shot back, bracing himself. The device pulsed, a resonant frequency that seemed to ripple through the air like an invisible tide. The infected paused, their aggression faltering as Thal's thoughts echoed through the collective consciousness. "We need to work together," he projected, focusing every ounce of mental energy on the message. "I know this is strange. Hell, it's strange for us too, but cooperation is our only shot." For a moment, it seemed to work. The infected stood still, their heads tilting as though considering the proposition. Hope fluttered through Thal's chest, a fragile thing easily crushed under the weight of doubt. But then, as if on cue, the universe reminded him that hope was a cruel mistress. The device fizzled, sputtering like a soda can shake in one too many times. Sparks flew and the parasite-infested colonists roared back to life, surging forward with renewed vigor. "Of course it would go wrong," Thal muttered, feeling the universe's sense of irony laughing in his face. "Plan B, anyone," Carla yelled, swinging her stun baton with all the enthusiasm of a lumberjack at a log-cutting contest. "Plan B is still don't die," Thal shouted back, dodging an infected miner who looked like he'd been ripped straight from a horror flick. Dr. Neem was frantically adjusting the device, her fingers flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to regain control. "Give me a minute. Pretty sure we don't have that long," Thal replied, ducking under a swinging fist. Just when things seemed darkest, a brilliant idea, or maybe just sheer panic, sparked in Thal's mind. "The greenhouse," he yelled. "We need to reroute the power grid." "How? We're kinda in the middle of a situation here," Carla called, electricity crackling from her baton like an angry Tesla coil. Thal's mind raced, piecing together a plan from the haphazard jumble of knowledge he'd cobbled together over a lifetime of bad decisions and worse luck. "Prophet, get to the control room. We need to redirect every watt we've got to the greenhouse ventilation system." Prophet, who'd somehow managed to avoid being pummeled thus far, nodded. "Got it." He sprinted off, his wiry form slipping through the chaos with the ease of a man who'd spent his life dodging trouble. The infected were gaining ground, their numbers overwhelming despite the resistance's best efforts. Thal fought his way through the melee, trying not to think too hard about the odds or the fact that he was now trusting his fate to Prophet, the man whose idea of advice often sounded like fortune cookies gone rogue. In the control room, Prophet's fingers flew over the controls with a speed that suggested divine intervention, or perhaps just the sheer will to survive. Lights flickered, systems groaned, and the air was filled with the sounds of machinery clanking to life in a desperate bid to realign the colony's fragile infrastructure. Back in the greenhouse, an eerie calm settled over the battle. The air hummed with the raw energy of the redirected power, a tangible force that seemed to resonate with the collective consciousness of the parasites. Thal felt the shift before he saw it. The infected halted, their eyes flickering with something that might have been understanding, or at least as close as the parasites could get. The mental link he'd established throbbed with potential, like a radio tuning into a long-lost station. "Stand down," Thal projected, pouring every ounce of conviction into the words. "We can coexist. We can survive. But only if we work together." The response was a murmur of agreement, the hive mind's resistance ebbing as the energy coursed through their shared consciousness. The battle-weary colonists paused, hope flickering in their eyes as the infected lowered their heads, confusion giving way to acceptance. "It's working," Dr. Neem breathed, her voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. "For now," Thal replied, the weight of the moment pressing on him like a suffocating shroud. "But we need to make sure this peace holds." The true nature of the parasites was revealed in that moment of tenuous understanding. They weren't mindless invaders, but a collective seeking survival in a hostile galaxy. Their desire for energy was a biological imperative, not a malevolent conquest. Thal couldn't help but reflect on the irony. Humanity had always prided itself on adaptability, on finding ways to thrive against the odds. Now, they'd found a way to coexist with creatures that had once been their greatest threat. I guess we all learned something today, Carla said, her tone laced with dry humor. Mostly that the universe likes to keep us on our toes. Thal chuckled, the sound rough and hoarse. Yeah, like a cosmic dance where the music's always changing and you're never quite sure if you're leading or following. Doctor. Neem nodded, her expression thoughtful. We've got a long way to go. But at least we're moving forward together. As the colonists regrouped, the tenuous alliance with the parasites held, a fragile truce built on necessity and understanding. Thal knew it wouldn't be easy, nothing worth having ever was, but for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. And on Selene's bastion, that was worth more than all the energy in the universe. The aftermath of the chaos on Selene's bastion was nothing short of a cosmic hangover. The kind that lingered long after the last shot was swallowed and the bar lights flickered back to life, revealing the mess left behind. The ragtag resistance had managed to put the brakes on Armageddon, but now there was the small matter of rebuilding a colony that had all the structural integrity of a sandcastle in a hurricane. Thal Marwick stood in what used to pass for the main hub, now looking more like a scene from a post-apocalyptic art installation. Bits of machinery lay scattered like forgotten toys, and the walls bore scars from the skirmish with the infected, though he supposed remodeling was as good a term as any. Leora Neem was fiddling with the communication device, which was now more of a wishful-thinking amplifier in the literal sense. She had the kind of focus that suggested either a breakthrough or a breakdown, and Thal wasn't placing any bets. "Think it'll work next time?" Thal asked, leaning against a half-busted console that groaned under his weight. Leora looked up, her expression a cocktail of exhaustion and determination. "If by work you mean not explode in my face, then sure, I'm optimistic." "Optimistic like a turkey during Thanksgiving," Thal quipped, earning a dry smile from Leora. "Hey, give her a break," Carla chimed in, her stun baton now holstered like a retired gunslinger. "She's the reason we're not decorating those walls ourselves." "True," Thal admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. The mission had left him with more bruises than a peach in a mosh pit, and the existential crisis he'd been nursing was now taking up permanent residence. Prophet, ever the optimist, was busy rallying the remaining colonists, which involved more pep talks than Thal thought were necessary. But then again, Prophet had a knack for getting people to consider the glass half full, even if it was filled with something toxic. "Listen up, everyone," Prophet called out, his voice carrying with enough enthusiasm to make a motivational speaker jealous. "We've survived this long and we're going to keep on surviving. That's what we do best." A scattered cheer went up, more out of habit than genuine belief. Thal couldn't blame them. The colonists' morale was about as steady as a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest. As the makeshift assembly broke up, Thal caught up with Prophet. "Nice speech. You ever think about running for office?" "Only if I get to make promises I can't keep," Prophet replied, his grin wide enough to shame a Cheshire cat. With a collective effort, the colony began the arduous task of rebuilding. Like a crew of drunken sailors tasked with fixing a sinking ship, they patched up walls, salvaged what tech they could, and tried to ignore the ever-present specter of disaster lurking in the shadows. Thal found himself in the greenhouse, the plants offering a semblance of normalcy, or as close as one could get on a moon where breathing was a commodity. The infected were still in there, now more like reluctant roommates than mortal enemies. "Funny how they're just hanging out now," Carla observed, nodding towards the glass walls where the infected were visible, their movements synchronized like a bizarre dance troupe. "Guess we're all just prisoners in this lunar loony bin." "Prisoners with a view," Thal replied, gazing out at the muted expanse of space beyond. "At least we're not alone in our existential misery." "True enough," Carla agreed, her tone softening. "But we're gonna need more than duct tape and good intentions to keep this place together. Maybe we could write a self-help book," Thal suggested, half serious. "Surviving Lunar Colonies for Dummies." "With a foreword by the Parasites," Carla added, a wry smile tugging at her lips. As evening, or whatever passed for it on Selene's bastion, settled in, Thal and Leora found themselves back in the hub, staring at the stars through the reinforced windows. "Do you ever think about how small we are?" Leora asked, breaking the silence. "Every damn day," Thal replied, his voice tinged with a mix of wonder and resignation. "But then I remember that even the smallest cog can screw up the whole machine." Leora chuckled, the sound a balm on their frayed nerves. "I guess that's one way to look at it. We're all just trying to make things a little less broken." "Maybe that's the point," Thal mused, staring out into the abyss. "Fix what we can when we can and not worry too much about the rest." "Optimistic, aren't you?" Leora teased. "Yeah, but don't tell anyone," Thal replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "I've got a reputation to maintain." The next days bled into each other with the monotony of a broken record, but with each passing Ior, the colony took small steps towards stability. New protocols were established to prevent another outbreak, which mostly involved more communication and less panic, a novel concept for the residents of Selene's bastion. The infected, now integrating into the colony's routine, were proving to be surprisingly cooperative. The Parasites had agreed to maintain the ceasefire, apparently more interested in coexistence than conquest. Which, considering their initial reception, was a bit like discovering your sworn enemy enjoyed knitting on weekends. Thal watched as the colony adapted, each person finding their place in the new order. It was an odd mix of unity and dysfunction, like a family that argued at dinner but still passed the potatoes. Through it all, the existential crisis that had once loomed over Thal like a thundercloud seemed to shrink. He realized that maybe, just maybe, surviving was enough. Not every story needed a grand resolution, and perhaps that was the most human thing of all. As the colony settled into its new rhythm, Thal found himself standing at the edge of the greenhouse, staring out into the endless void. The stars twinkled with indifference, a reminder of just how small and insignificant they all were. But here, in this strange little corner of the universe, they'd carved out a place, imperfect but theirs. "Hey, Thal," Carla called, breaking him from his reverie. "You coming or what?" "Yeah," Thal replied, turning away from the stars. "I'm coming." He joined Carla and the others, their steps echoing in the corridor as they walked towards whatever came next. It wasn't heroism or destiny that kept them going, just the stubborn, beautiful tenacity of being human. And on Selene's bastion, that was worth more than all the stars in the sky.